It's important because when we get to Revelation, we're going to see a beast that comes out of the earth. There's a difference. Now watch. The first of these beasts was like a lion. It had eagle's wings. And I beheld until the wings thereof were plucked up, and it was lifted up from the earth, and made stand upon the feet as a man, and a man's heart was given to it. Symbolisms. Stay with me. And behold, another beast, a second, like to a bear, and it raised up itself on one side, and it had 3 ribs in the mouth of it, between the teeth of it. And they said thus unto it, Arise and devour much flesh. And after this I beheld, and lo, another like a leopard, which had upon the back of it 4 wings of a fowl. The beast had also 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. Now after this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, and strong exceedingly, and it had great iron teeth. It devoured and broke in pieces, and stamped the residue with the feet of it. And it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. Remember, in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, the very base of the image had 2 feet with 10 toes. This is not 20 toes. It's 2 feet, five toes on each foot. 10. I want to welcome you again to Prophecy Matters. My name is Daryl Arnez, and it is always a joy and a privilege to just come and share some thoughts relative to Bible prophecy and connecting those prophecies of the scriptures to our modern day. We are living in prophetic times. If there's ever been a time that's been prophetic time, we are living in those days. There are so many things that are taking place, especially as far as America and the West is concerned. And we're going to be looking at that over the next couple of sessions because I want you to understand the times that we are in so that you will be aware of how to navigate through those particular times. Before we begin, I do want to remind you to like, to share, and to subscribe to these conversations because that helps to get the algorithms, as people like to say, to get the algorithms to actually pick up these conversations so that they can reach the maximum amount of people. So be sure to like, to share, to subscribe. If you have any questions or you'd like to comment on any of the material, please do so in the comment section. I always try my best to respond to all of the comments that are in the comment section, unless, of course, it's something that's kind of offbeat and it is obviously someone trolling the channel, in which case I just have a tendency to delete the comment. But if you'd like to share, if you have any questions about anything that we're going over, please put them in the comment section. The one thing that I do not want to do is to confuse anybody with these particular conversations. You know, over the years, prophecy or biblical prophecy has been one of those areas where there's been so much speculation, so much guesswork that went into it, as opposed to the particular way that we are approaching these conversations. What we're building up to is two things. Number one is to reveal the image of the beast and what nation is responsible for erecting that image. And then number two, to understand the place and the work that the Antichrist is operating from. It will surprise you that the Antichrist is probably not who you think it is. So we're going to be looking at the end time Antichrist. We're going to look at in what stage this Antichrist appears, what it's like, and how he acts. Now, in the course of Christian history or the history of the church, there's been many candidates that had been proposed as the fulfillment of the little horn. Now, if you're not familiar with the little horn, you will be by the time the next couple of sessions are over. But many candidates have been proposed as being the little horn and fulfilling the beast prophecies of both the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation. For instance, Mussolini at one time was said to have been the Antichrist. At another point in time, of Hitler, the Ayatollah Khomeini, Yashir Arafat, Henry Kissinger, Saddam Hussein, Barack Obama. Probably now many people are saying that Donald Trump is the Antichrist or the little horn, of which he is not. And the one that's most fascinating is that there will be this future, very nasty individual who's going to rebuild the Jewish temple in Jerusalem. And we're going to look at the reality that nowhere in Scripture does the idea of a third Jewish temple being erected. And I say a third temple for very good reason. And just stay with me in these conversations and you'll see exactly why. But this individual will raise up the Jewish temple, install an image of himself, a pose, a tattoo on the forehead and right hand of followers. He's going to persecute the Jews, of course, for 3.5 years. You all know about that. We're going to cover all of that because much of that is the guesswork of very fanciful prophecy teachers. But what I want to do is use a very careful, disciplined, systematic, and logical approach to biblical prophecy. The Father has always used prophecy to alert his people as to what he's doing in the earth. And so it should be no exception for us today. So prophecy is not given to frighten. Prophecy is not given to create fanciful movies. Prophecy is not given for any of those reasons. Prophecy isn't given for us to, just take comfort, so to speak, and that we understand biblical prophecy. No, biblical prophecy is given for very specific reasons. So we're going to use a method that comes out of the biblical text itself. It's kind of historical flow. It's a historical flow approach to biblical prophecy. What that means is that the starting point of the prophetic chain begins, it has an end point, and it covers everything in between. So the historical flow posits that there's a starting point to biblical prophecy, there's an end point, of course, to biblical prophecy, and everything else in between is simply filling in the time in between the start and the finish of the prophecy. You're going to see that biblical prophecy is pretty simple to understand when we understand the symbolisms that are in the text. Symbolisms. Now, when I say biblical prophecy, I'm speaking primarily about the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation. Those two books go hand in hand. It's almost impossible to understand the book of Revelation without a foundational understanding of the book of Daniel. There is also the issue of understanding history. And this is probably the most problematic aspect of understanding biblical prophecy is our lack of awareness on history. Now, of course, as is happening today, many people try to rewrite history to make it say what they wanted to say. History doesn't work that way. History is very documented. It's based upon very significant facts. So you almost have to deny the facts of history to walk away from it and say, well, no, that's not what it means. And unfortunately, right now, we have a president and a whole swath of our political parties who don't believe in facts. They have what they call alternate facts or alternate realities. So they attempt to rewrite everything. But we're going to see prophecy is very clear. Prophecy is literally etched in stone. So here's kind of how that method works. The prophecy that's given begins in the day that the prophet wrote. Okay? Prophecy begins in the day that the prophecy wrote. It concludes when the Creator sets up his everlasting kingdom. So prophecy begins when the message is given to the prophet. It ends, this is the whole prophetic chain, it ends with the setting up of the everlasting kingdom. In between the beginning and the end is the middle section, and that section flows without any interruptions or parentheses. Now, there are large schools of biblical prophecy teachers who will say that certain prophetic events stopped and then they pick back up thousands of years later or in our day. Example, they say that the prophecies that were given in the book of Daniel relative to the coming of the Messiah, because they didn't accept the Messiah, the prophetic clock stopped. That clock then picks back up in the last days. And that's supposedly the last 7 years or the 7 years of tribulation that people have inaccurately gotten out of that prophecy. So you can know exactly where you are in the flow of biblical prophecy when you understand this particular method. The prophecy begins when it's given to the prophet. It ends with the setting up of the everlasting kingdom. In between that is the working out of prophecy, or what we could refer to as world history. Okay? Now, next important thing to realize in prophecy is we're dealing with symbols. This is why it's important, if you're going to understand the book of Revelation, to understand the book of Daniel, because these symbols are first established in the book of Daniel, and they just carry over into the book of Revelation. So let's say this, and we're going to look at some of this today, but we see lions with eagle's wings. We see leopards with 4 heads. We see dragons with iron teeth and 10 horns. In Daniel 7, the Antichrist is seen as a little horn. In the book of Revelation, it's seen as a beast, Revelation 13. Now, it's obvious that the Antichrist is neither a horn nor a beast, literally speaking. So symbols will represent something far greater than just the symbol itself. Symbols must be decoded to understand their meaning. Now, when I talk about decoding, I'm not talking about some of the fanciful ways that people have gone about trying to decode the symbols of the book of Daniel. The scriptures themselves contain the key to decoding the image. It could be the immediate context. Other times we would have to go to other parts of the scripture to determine its meaning. And so this is how we are approaching biblical prophecy. So before we dive in, let me again encourage you to like, to share, and to subscribe to these conversations because you're not going to want to miss any. If you do miss part of it, you can always go back and rewatch it or rewatch the previous section because we're building line upon line, precept upon precept. Recently, this is interesting as you grab your scriptures because we're going to go into the book of Daniel again. But I received this very interesting comment, and someone made the statement. They said, well, it seems like you're just rehashing the content over and over. Now, this is probably someone that's been listening to me to a number of years, and I teach on this periodically. I do it at least once a year, but in the day in which we live, it's so applicable that it would be foolish of me not to share the information again. So if you've heard any previous teaching on biblical prophecy, don't just turn it off and say, oh, yeah, I heard all of this before, because there's going to be some dynamics to it that are added because of recent historic events that are prophetic, that are going to add to the information that you already have. So having said that, I want to go now back to the book of Daniel. In the last sessions, we looked at, I believe, Daniel chapter 4, which dealt with the dream of Nebuchadnezzar. And in that dream, Nebuchadnezzar, you'll remember, saw an image. He saw a great image. And this image had a head of gold. It had chest and arms of silver, a waist of brass or bronze. The legs were iron. The feet were part iron and part clay. A stone was cut out of the mountain, smote the image on the feet, indicating the destruction of all human governments and empires and the final establishment of the kingdom of God. Daniel revealed to Nebuchadnezzar that it's God who changes the times and the seasons, but God was revealing to Nebuchadnezzar things that would come to pass after his reign. We noted that the head of gold represented Babylon, as is known in the very following chapter of Daniel when Nebuchadnezzar erected the image of gold. And it was representative of him in Babylon rejecting the eternal plan and purpose of God. Nebuchadnezzar wanted Babylon to be this everlasting kingdom with no other nation ever rising to power or no kingdom coming after it, kind of like Trump's Make America Great agenda. These things are so parallel. They're so parallel. But in Daniel chapter 7, this is what we read. In the first year of Belshazzar, the king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream. Now remember, Nebuchadnezzar had a dream previously, and it was revealed to Nebuchadnezzar. This is the succession of empires. You're going to have Babylon, the head of gold. You're going to have the Medes and the Persian Empire, the breast and the arms of silver. You're going to have the Greece, the Empire of Greece, represented by the waist of brass. Then you're going to have Rome, legs of iron. Then you're going to have the collapse of Rome and the establishment of 10 kingdoms, not empires, but kingdoms represented by the 10 toes on the 2 feet. So you got the picture. After that, there are no world empires that will arise. There will be nations that have great power influence and worldwide. What's the word I can use? Will have a worldwide effect, but none of the nature of Babylon, Medo Persia, but none of the impact of Babylon, Medo Persia, Greece, or Rome. Those four empires are the only world empires that will exist during historical time. Are you with me? Babylon, Medo Persia, Greece, Rome. Check your world history. This was given to Nebuchadnezzar hundreds of years before those empires arose. So let's look again. Daniel 7. In the first year of Belshazzar, this is not Nebuchadnezzar, this is Belshazzar. Some say he was Nebuchadnezzar's son, some say he was his grandson, but this is another king of Babylon. Daniel was in Babylon through successive kings. But watch. It said Daniel had a dream and visions of his head upon his bed, and then he wrote the dream and told the sum of the matters. No, Daniel spoke and saw, or Daniel spoke. I saw in my visions by night, and behold, now here's where your symbolisms and your imagery is going to begin. I saw the four winds of heaven strive upon the great sea. Keep that in mind. Four winds of the heavens, and they're striving upon the great seas. And it says, and four great beasts came up from the sea, diverse or different from one another. So there's four beasts coming up from the sea. This is important because when we get to Revelation, we're going to see a beast that comes out of the earth. There's a difference. Now watch. The first of these beasts was like a lion. It had eagle's wings, and I beheld until the wings thereof were plucked up, and it was lifted up from the earth, and made stand upon the feet as a man, and a man's heart was given to it. Symbolisms. Stay with me. And behold, another beast, a second, like to a bear, and it raised up itself on one side, and it had three ribs in the mouth of it, between the teeth of it. And they said thus unto it, arise and devour much flesh. And after this I beheld, and lo, another like a leopard, which had upon the back of it four wings of a fowl. The beast had also four heads, and dominion was given to it. Now after this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible, and strong exceedingly, and it had great iron teeth. It devoured and broke in pieces, and stamped the residue with the feet of it. And it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. Remember, in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, the very base of the image had 2 feet with 10 toes. This is not 20 toes. It's 2 feet, five toes on each foot. 10. This beast that Daniel saw had 10 horns. So you kind of already begin to see there's some comparison between Nebuchadnezzar's dream and Daniel's dream. Verse 8 says, I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were three of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. That's the dream. So Daniel sees this dream, and in this dream, he sees these four beasts coming up out of the sea. In Daniel 7, verses 1 and 2, understand winds represent military wars and conflict. Military war and conflict. Isaiah 17 and 12 says this: Woe to the multitudes of many people who make a noise like the roar of the seas, and to the rushing of nations that make a rushing like the rushing of mighty waters. So when you're reading about seas, now we're not talking about the Red Sea and the Mediterranean Sea. We're talking specifically when it comes to understanding biblical prophecy, symbolic biblical prophecy. Winds represent strife. It represents war. Seas represents a multitude of people. So you see these four winds striving upon the great seas. And out of all of this conflict is where you get the emerging of nations. Nations come into being through conflict, through war. Are you with me? All right. So winds become a symbol of that strife. The four winds of heaven striving against the great sea represents the terrible scenes of conquest and revolution by which kingdoms and empires have attained to power. We're talking world history. This is biblical prophecy. This is God revealing to the prophets to transmit to his people an understanding of what's taking place in world history. So when we see everything that's going on today under the Trump administration, when we see Trump Vance humiliating or trying to humiliate world leaders, and we see the Trump administration no longer siding with the European allies that America has been established with all of these years, but rather siding with dictators and oligarchs, you can look at it and wonder, why is this happening? Or you can turn to biblical prophecy and see exactly why America is on the trajectory that it's going. It's prophecy. Let's keep going. In Daniel 7:3, he begins to describe these beasts. He sees four beasts come up out of the sea. Now, these great beasts, which are four, Daniel 7:17, he says this. Well, let's start at verse 15. He says, I, Daniel, was grieved in my spirit in the midst of my body, and the visions of my head troubled me. I came near unto one of them that stood by and asked him the truth of all of this. So he told me, and he made me know the interpretation of the things. Verse 17. These great beasts, which are four, stay with me, are four kings. As we noted with Nebuchadnezzar's dream, it had a head of gold, which Daniel told Nebuchadnezzar, this head of gold represents you, but the king represents empires or nations, just as President Trump represents America. And we have all of these different world leaders who represent the respective nations that they're from, it was no different in the ancient world. Kings represent the empire. What is Daniel seeing? Daniel is seeing the four world empires. Now, Daniel already understands because of his interpretation of Nebuchadnezzar's dream that he's dealing with Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. Well, we're just dealing with those four. We're not talking about the divided Roman Empire or the European world as we would know it today. But watch. Daniel 2:38, Daniel told the king he was the head of gold, but after him another kingdom would arise. Now, if you read Daniel 5, I believe it was, and we'll see, I believe that was Belshazzar as well, but he had a feast. He made this party. He went into the temple, took the golden vessels out of the temple. This was the handwriting on the wall, mene tekel upharsin, your weight in the balances and found wanting. And it says, that night Nebuchadnezzar died, and the Medes and the Persians took the kingdom. That's when Persia came into power. The reason this beast in the book of Daniel, it says it was raised up on one side, is because one side of that Medo-Persian alliance was stronger than the other. And of course, it was the Persians that were stronger. So we know about the kingdom of Persia. We know about the reign of Persia. This is where the whole book of I believe the book of Esther is taking place. That was in dealing with Persia. You know, Haman. That whole story. So we see clearly that these beasts that Nebuchadnezzar dreamt and these beasts that Daniel saw, these are real historical events. And so we see that Medo-Persia, in fact, did come up after Babylon as the silver breastplate and arms represented in Daniel's image, and also the bear that raised itself up on one side in Daniel's vision. Do you see how the symbolisms work? So once we establish the initial use of that symbol, it carries through the rest of the text. We're trying to get to the beast in Revelation 13, but we need to understand where this imagery gets established. Again, be sure to like, share, and subscribe.